Welcome to the SES Center's new podcast, Perspectives. We are a New Delhi based think tank, and this podcast is a platform for our researchers to discuss technology policy issues in an accessible format. In today's episode, we talk about the emergence of financial influencers on social media, their impact on society, and the government's attempts to clamp down on potentially harmful financial advice.
So, guys, it's tax season, and I was just looking up some tax saving investments, and I just got flooded with a bunch of these influencers on my Instagram feed. Everyone was telling me how I can make more money, how I can generate more wealth. And that just got me thinking, who are these people to give me such advice? Usually, you would go to your dad's CA or uncle who was in banking, and they had those credentials. But now we've got finfluencers, and some of us might question who are they to give us advice, but it seems they're doing quite well, and a lot of people are following this advice. Now, finfluencers got really popular starting with the pandemic. People had a lot of time, and they ended up saving a lot of money because no one was going anywhere. So they wanted to invest that money. And lo and behold, you had finfluencers telling them what was the latest get rich quick scheme, and they started following this advice. People tend to trust other people over the internet because they look just like you and me, and when they speak confidently, you think they are knowledgeable. And people were benefited by their advice as well, because we have really low financial literacy in India, and people genuinely needed that guidance. Some of these influencers give really good information about just financial awareness. So that's where these people got really popular. But now we've started having situations where people are losing money because they just followed a random influencer's advice who didn't know what they're talking about. And it's turning out to be quite a risky scenario.
Yeah, I looked up one thing, and then my entire Insta feed was just full of people giving me not financial advice and going off about how this new stock is doing really well, or maybe I should invest in this crypto. Everyone had an opinion about what I should do with my money. So I looked it up. Apparently, it's not just us, it's a very common thing. Most people are getting their advice from these people, these influencers. And it's gotten to a point that most people below the age of around 35 years around the world are now getting their financial advice primarily from this stream. We're no longer relying on newspapers or news channels or any other authentic source as such. So I guess it becomes very difficult when anyone can pick up a camera and voice their opinion, and it's out there for all of us to see, and the algorithm keeps pushing it onto you because you Googled one keyword.
Yeah, I mean, given that it's becoming such a problem, I'm wondering if there's sort of been any action from the government to step in and curb this menace and lay out guidelines on what people can or cannot do. I mean, I don't know if you guys have seen anything of the sort.
There has been some action. This is something that particularly concerns India's market regulator, the Security Exchange Board of India. It traditionally regulates the securities market where people invest, and it ensures that it's safe for everyone to invest in and there is no fraud or deception in the market. Now, since influencers are exercising a significant influence in these markets, this has become relevant for the SEBI. The action of the SEBI says that any body that is registered with the SEBI or any person that is regulated with the SEBI has the responsibility of ensuring that they are not financially associating or providing any sponsorship or giving any sort of financial assistance to any unregistered influencer who does not have the license to give stock advice or investment advice. Now, if an influencer has the required registration to give investment advice in the market, they are allowed to do so. But it is the responsibility of SEBI registered entities that they are not giving financial assistance to people who do not have requisite registration. The SEBI has tried to make a distinguish, like has tried to, the SEBI has tried to distinguish between what constitutes financial advice and investment advice and what constitutes financial education. The Because it's not the SEBI does not want to cut off all financial education that is given by influencers, because it is beneficial for the SEBI, and it's something that it wants to see grow more and more as people become more financially aware about how the market works. But it's important for the SEBI to ensure that if a person who is not does not have requisite registration to give investment advice is providing stock tips to people and is influencing their decisions, and they have certain monetary consideration behind it, which other people are not aware of, that can lead to a significant amount of fraud in the market, and it can lead to people investing in things that are not good for them. So that is the rationale behind why this is being done.
That's interesting. And actually, now that you mention SEBI, I remember an article I read last week which quoted the chairman of the body saying that if you even name a stock in your video, then that could constitute financial advice. So I feel that sort of blurs the line between what you were saying between financial education and financial advice, especially by unregistered entities, because sometimes it can be important even to educate people financially, to talk to them about real world dynamics and name a particular company or name a particular stock. So I just wonder how this balance is going to be achieved between these sort of two competing objectives that SEBI is trying to achieve here.
Yeah, it's going to be difficult, I think, because there's another regulation. The SEBI tried teaming up with the Advertising Standards Council of India. This ASCI, it's like a self-regulatory body. Various members of the industry, from pharma, food, all of these businesses, they got together and have a body that regulates advertisements and purely advertisements. So they came up with these guidelines for influencers across the board, and they're also addressing financial influencers because there's such a great scope for harm for people. Now they also define these people as, anyone who's talking even about the common merits and demerits of financial products. So it's quite a broad definition, and it might easily envelop people who are giving financial education and not investment advice. And these guidelines insist that anyone who is giving investment advice needs to be registered with the SEBI, even to advertise investment related information on any social media influence platform. But when they talk about demerits or merits of financial products, that could easily mean, when I'm just talking about whether FDs are a safe option or are SIPs better, and even without naming specific brands, if I'm talking about merits and demerits, then it could very easily go on to the education side. And I think there needs to be a stricter demarcation between what is investment advice. If you're saying that even mentioning the name of one stock could make people come under these regulations, it's going to really have a chilling effect over influencers across the internet.
That's quite interesting. And talking generally about influencers, one trend which is pretty common in India and as well as abroad is that you have a lot of celebrities coming in and advising certain kinds of financial products. Now, they may not always understand the implications of these products. So, for instance, in the US, you had Tom Brady, who was affiliated with FTX, and you've had Kim Kardashian, who's been affiliated with certain cryptocurrencies, and they've all been hauled up by America's security regulator. So, how do you distinguish between a finfluencer, who is someone who is actively giving people advice on finance, versus a celebrity who happens to dabble it on a one-off basis? Are they both equally severe? And I think on the second point of what you mentioned, which is demarcating between or having strict guidelines to say that, this is what is permitted, this is what is not permitted, this is probably not a problem that's limited just to India. So, do we have any kind of global comparisons where we can learn from and see in terms of giving a clearer demarcation of what is permissible, what is not permissible?
We do, in fact. Actually, Australia's regulatory approach is kind of similar, and it seems like we are following in their footsteps because they also regulate their unregistered influencers. They limit them from issuing financial investment advice on the internet. But what they have done well and what they've done kind of differently is that they have issued detailed public facing documents which explain what financial product information or financial advice means and what financial education means. So that distinction is being made clear using examples and using simple language, and through providing people with a lot of material which explains this distinction, because making this distinction again is very important, as we have all discussed.
So what you're saying is that they're focusing on educating people so that they can check themselves and so that they have a check on their own actions. And that's also what
Yeah.
the ASAI guideline is doing, right? It's a self-regulation system. You check what you are doing. And the best part about it is that they're focusing on the issue of conflict of interest and fraud. And they make sure that if you have a sponsored product, if you're being sponsored by a mutual fund company or a investment app, then these influencers have to very clearly and boldly reveal that this is sponsored, this is a paid partnership, and it shouldn't be buried in some under some hashtags or some links where they say click more. So I think a self-regulatory body where everyone has basically a gentleman's contract that we'll all abide by these rules, that would work better than a regulator sitting on their head and telling them what to do and what not to do.
Yeah, I sort of agree with that, Akanksha, especially because if you're setting your own rules, you tend to have more incentive to follow them. But on the flip side, I'm just a little concerned about the enforceability when it comes to a self-regulatory body, because is it backing, is like as opposed to say a court of law or a quasi-judicial authority which has the sanction of law or government behind it, a self-regulatory body doesn't necessarily have that. So are there any indications of what kind of punishments they can dole out? What can be the consequences of not complying with these guidelines?
There have been cases regarding other traditional forms of advertisement where the courts have said that even if you're not a member of the ASCI, their decisions might be binding purely in interest of the consumers. They have made these declarations, but we'll have to see how that applies to influencers. We are yet to see any significant cases being decided. I mean, in terms of punishments, the SEBI has been punishing influencers. There have been some 20 warning notices that have gone out since, I think, May, where they've asked people that what you're doing is not awareness, this is investment advice, you're not registered. So if they continue to do that, they can be fined. There have been cases where people have been fined up to like 17 crores. This handle called BAP of Charts, he was fined like 17 crores and stopped from participating in the market. So I don't know if how effective the self-regulatory punishments might be, but the SEBI is definitely making an example out of some influencers.
That's quite interesting. And I think something else which came to mind when you were generally talking about finfluencers and influencers is that most of them are very publicly visible. We know who they are, they're clearly identifiable. But what happens in the cases of forums where identity isn't as clear? So for instance, Reddit has been a hotspot for people exchanging financial information with each other. In fact, it was so widespread at one point that they were able even to counter a hedge funds trading strategy with regards to Blockbuster, which is a precursor to Netflix of sort. It's basically a video rental service. And people on Reddit got together, they exchanged their research on how the company was performing financially. And they said that, hey, this strategy is probably something that's profitable. And literally millions of users adopted the same strategy and they were able to counter larger competing interests in the market. And similarly, I believe Telegram is a real hotspot for exchanging a lot of financial information where it's not necessarily coming from like a publicly identifiable source. So, what happens in these sort of cases?
I believe the nature of the internet in itself makes it very difficult to regulate all such violations in all such communities, because it's very easy to bypass any regulation and any filters which are imposed by the government or even the companies in compliance with government regulations. So we see this a lot with a short form content, where if a word is censored and it's not allowed, you just see people adding slashes to it, or the S would become a dollar sign. So regulating would be very difficult. And another aspect that US has been going into since all of this came into being has been the conflict of commercially protected speech, free speech, the influencers actually harming the economy. So striking a balance between these things also becomes a very difficult issue, especially in countries like US.
I think another factor is that SEBI can't be involved in with everything. They already have a lot on their plate. Their capacity is stretched to the limits. India is such a growing market right now. How are they going to regulate everything across the internet, whether it is organized finfluencers or just independent people talking about stock tips in threads? Like, I don't think they can be everywhere all the time. They have tried to orient their attention towards bodies they are already working with, right? These fund houses that they've said that, oh, you can't sponsor unregistered influencers. That's fine. They are targeting people they already work with. But I don't think they can spread that net over all the other influencers or any investment information that is happening across the internet. It just doesn't seem feasible.
Yeah, I think I completely agree with that point, and it probably points to the larger problem of a lack of overall financial literacy in the country, and that's further compounded by the fact that we're facing an extremely exuberant market right now. It's reaching record highs every other week or every other month. You have news that the Nifty and the Sensex have breached their previous high. Companies are performing exceptionally well, and people generally have this belief that investing in the stock market could get them life changing wealth. So I think in addition to regulation, which is one aspect of it, there needs to be greater emphasis on perhaps educating people on what these financial instruments really mean, what kind of research they should be doing. And that's not something that SEBI alone can do. I think it has to be a multi-stakeholder effort where, of course, influencers themselves are a very important part of it because they help spread that awareness and that education in the first place. And like Chavi said, protecting their free speech and their ability to provide this awareness is important. But I think it's also an area where bodies like think tanks, institutions like ourselves can play a broader role in helping people understand what the impact of certain financial instruments is and how they should deal with it and go about it. And taking this to the masses across tier 2 towns, tier 3 towns, villages, etc., is probably going to be the most impactful way of countering people falling into these traps, which they have been doing even previously before influencers were there in the form of chit fund scams and things like that. It's probably just taken a whole new avatar and form because of the internet. But I think the underlying root cause remains people knowing what they're doing and how where their money is going and how it's going to be used.
That's very true. Generating awareness will be the primary method to tackle all sorts of frauds. And like you said, chit funds existed, you had lotteries before, and finfluencers are just the latest evolution in the ways people could lose out their money. And creating awareness is the first line of defense.